Welcome to Mom Matters, created by moms for moms. Now, the World Health Organization calls climate change the greatest threat to humanity. And it's not just an environmental issue either. It's a public health crisis, especially for children. Today, Dr. Ethan Sims from St. Luke's and Dr. Wesley Pidcock from St. Alphonsus explain why kids are more vulnerable to climate-related health impacts and how us as parents can better understand and respond to these challenges. So the World Health, as mentioned, organizations actually defined climate change as the greatest threat to humanity. While climate change is often presented as solely an environmental or political issue, it's obviously an important public health crisis, right? We just explained that off the top. I want to talk about basically the history a little bit into how this has impacted kids. Give us a little background on how you're aware that this is actually something that is a health issue for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the interesting things about climate change is it really is a problem that affects all of us, regardless of your health status or how much money you make. It affects everybody. But there are certainly groups that are affected to a greater extent, and those tend to be the elderly, populations that have like a lower income, and particularly children. And one of the things the way that we experience climate change here in the West is through either extreme heat and drought, which then often leads to wildfire and poor air quality. And that can put kids at a particularly distinct disadvantages for a couple of reasons. One, they're not really just tiny adults, right? They have a completely different physiology in a lot of ways, in the sense that because they're smaller, they tend to breathe more frequently. And so as a result, they breathe in more of these toxins. And when you take that and combine it with the fact that literally all of their organ systems are developing, that's when organ systems tend to be at the highest risk of developing some kind of complication. So when you mix those toxins with the fact that they're developing, it can affect essentially like all of their organ systems, which can manifest in mental health outcomes, as well as asthma, essentially a problem with almost any organ system. When you also combine that with the fact that these are kids that tend to be, I guess there's a better way of saying it would be that it doesn't affect all kids equally.
Yeah.
It can affect kids that also have other problems. So maybe they live in that poor neighborhood and they don't have access to green space. They don't have AC in their house, right? Or AC in their schools. So it can make it harder to learn. It can make it harder to cope with those other stressors that they're dealing with. And you'll often hear that referred to as a threat multiplier.
Wow, okay. It makes complete sense. I think it's a whole new perspective, though, for a lot of people, parents in particular, right? Climate change, I know when we talk about it, at least in my household, it's something that we think about impacting the world, right? So you think about your environment, you think about nature, you think about the ocean. You don't stop to really think about what that means to you physically. This is very interesting and incredibly concerning. I'm trying to not be an alarmist because, wow, just as a parent hearing what you're saying, it makes me nervous.
Right.
Very nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the physical impact, right? But as well, we're hearing a health crisis. It's also a mental impact, right? So it's a threat to our safety. Tell us a bit about the psychological effects that things like wildfires and floods might be having on our children.
Yeah, so there are direct impacts of these traumatic events. You think of places like Paradise, California, or more recently Los Angeles, where people are, exposed to this traumatic, massive, terrifying wildfire that chases them from their home. And we see tons of PTSD, problems concentrating, poor test performance for years after events like that. They've studied kids that have had to flee climate events like this and documented pretty well the poor test performance and cognitive decline that they see for years after these kind of events. But then there are also direct impacts of the pollution in the air, like Wes mentioned, and the extreme heat that we see, especially in Idaho. We know that extreme heat leads to poor behavior, increased anger, higher rates of violence, higher rates of hospitalization for anxiety, depression, and pretty much every kind of psychiatric disease. One of the things that's challenging about people with existing mental health issues in the setting of extreme heat is that they often have difficulty regulating their body temperature because of the physiology associated with some of the mental health diseases like schizophrenia. And the medications we use to treat those diseases exacerbate that problem and make it so that you have less ability to regulate your temperature. So people are more likely to be more impacted by heat if you have underlying mental health disease or you're on some of the medications we use to treat it. And then wildfire smoke poses a different set of problems where we see things like cognitive impairment, rates of dementia. There's multiple studies that have shown people that have lived and grown up in areas where wildfires are more prevalent have higher rates of all kinds of dementia on biopsy studies at death. And I worry that our kids are being exposed to this over a longer period of time. So are we setting up this future generation for a pandemic of dementia because of this clearly established relationship between wildfire smoke and mental decline?
Oh my goodness. Okay. We are just getting into the weeds, if you will, of this, but we're going to pause for just a moment. We'll come back and continue this very important conversation. Welcome back to Mom Matters. We're talking about a very unique, important topic from a perspective that you may not have considered. It's climate change and its impacts on your child's physical and mental well-being. I'm joined by two fantastic physicians here who know a ton about this topic. You both have researched this extensively and recently have done a symposium on this for our community. We were just talking about the impacts physically and emotionally that climate change can have on our kids. I want to know, as a parent though, what are some of the physical signs? How do we know if our children are already experiencing climate-related stress?
Some of them can be kind of vague. It can be anything from having a headache to a stomach ache or not sleeping well, poor appetite, lack of concentration, fatigue. And some of those can be a little bit harder to assess out. So I think it's important to, obviously, as most parents would do, ask them what's bothering them. The other thing that happens is they might just say, hey, Mom, I'm worried about, our planet, or I'm worried about our environment, or are these fires going to happen every summer? So some of them can be a little bit vague and some of them can be quite obvious.
Okay, so as a parent, you just might assume, oh, they got a bug or they ate something bad or they just need to get more rest, right? They're tired, they had a long week. But really to sit down and have those conversations are incredibly important, right? We hear this all the time.
Particularly when we're dealing with one of those climate events.
Yes.
During that time period.
Yeah, and what would you recommend as a parent then? I mean, obviously, I work in the news business. We talk a lot about, I'm a meteorologist myself, a lot about weather patterns, impact, global events. The LA fires was one, right? Is it important as parents that we actually sit down and discuss these things with our kids to make sure they understand the impact as well, just psychologically, not to mention maybe some of the physical impacts of what's already happening around us here in Idaho, wildfire season, per se? What would you guys say to that?
I mean, absolutely. I think kids need acknowledgement that the feelings they're experiencing are real, and they also need their parents to lead by example and show them that, this is a legitimate concern. I acknowledge your feelings, and these are some ways you can take action to get around that despair. I think we've talked about this before, but I feel strongly that action is the antidote to despair. And it's not just the kids getting involved in taking action, it's their parents, the generation that has more money, more influence, more responsibility for the problem that's been created, showing those kids that they acknowledge their role in this and are taking action to fight climate change. This is not a problem that any one person can fix. And I think leveling it on our kids' generation, that it's their problem to fix, takes that anxiety and makes it even worse. There's a big study of the global youth in 2021 that showed that more than 70% of kids felt like our generation failed them, and that leaders in the world are failing them. More than 40% of kids that were surveyed said they don't want to have kids because they're scared of the future that's coming to them. And I think these are not the kind of things that we want to just brush off and ignore. These are things we want to help our kids cope with. And again, with action being the key to fighting this kind of despair, I think getting kids involved and engaged in some community activities that can, make a difference, but not try to make all the difference, because no one person is going to fix everything, but every one person can fix something. And taking that action and not feeling like you're responsible for everything is a real way to help our kids. One of the things I think about is, this is a big part of my career. I still drive a gas car because I don't think it's practical for me, having just come into this space over the past couple of years, to sell a relatively new car and buy an electric car. But that doesn't mean that I'm failing the climate sphere. There are some structural problems that make it challenging to make changes like that. But I'm looking for action in different ways and supporting my kids in different ways to combat this. And one of them is talking about it, like you mentioned. And that's one of the big reasons that Wes and I put together this symposium, is because we feel like if people can talk about it and have some baseline knowledge about it, they can really spread the word in their community that this is not a political problem, this is a health problem that we're all being affected by and that we're all responsible for fixing.
Yeah, and for a little clarity too, for those watching right now, you guys put together a public symposium for people to go and learn more about this, so we can figure out our role in this whole situation and be there for our kids, right? Because this isn't just an environmental thing, this is also a human race thing. Making sure that we're keeping ourselves, our children, as healthy as possible. One thing that you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting was not only are we empowering our kids to do something so they have action, they feel like that they're at least doing what they can in their control, but also that parents show up as well, right? That we are a part of it too, and not just burdening the kids with, okay, so this upsets you, you're uncomfortable, here's what you can do while mom and dad just kind of sit back on the back burner, but actually showing that investment, that love, that acknowledgement, which also means action on our part. Okay, so we talked about the physical symptoms that our children might be having or exhibiting if they are under climate change stress. Really quick, share with us the psychological symptoms that they might be exhibiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that we're most commonly going to see in our Idaho communities, where heat and smoke are the big things, are sort of kids that get faster to anger, have shorter tempers, because everyone acknowledges when it's really hot and miserable outside, it makes your temper worse, your patience is shorter, but it also takes away our ability to do things that help us cope with those things. I think most Idahoans have some outdoor pursuit that they love.
Yes, what's Idaho?
Yeah.
We live in the outdoors, yeah.
And, I mean, I can tell you, I went backpacking in the Sawtooth last year, and for like a month after that, I was bulletproof. Like I just was, my patience was much better. But when the heat is really terrible or the smoke is really bad, you can't get outside and do those things safely. And so your ability to cope with the increased stress that you're experiencing is worse. So that's another example of that threat multiplier process where not only is it directly impacting your mental health, but it's impacting your ability to cope with the stresses that you're seeing. And it really makes it, this significant challenge for our kids.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Mom Matters. We're talking about climate change and how it physically and mentally impacts our kids. All right, so I want to talk about kids that may have already been exposed to a traumatic natural event, like a fire, like a flood. Tell us about the post-trauma that those kids may be dealing with and how parents can keep an eye out for those signs. How do we identify that that's something that has really imprinted on our kids?
There's a couple things to look out for. Some of that being they might have nightmares, they might have fear of going back to where that event occurred, so not wanting to go back to the house, not wanting to be there, decreased appetite, weight loss, and just overall like withdrawing are signs that can be definitely associated with post-traumatic stress. A lot of it can be reliving the events, like wanting to talk about it a lot, and those could all be signs.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you think about nationally or globally, you think about major events like the Paradise Fires in California or the more recent LA fires, where whole communities were forced to evacuate. Those kids are showing rates of PTSD, poor cognitive performance for years after those events have happened. You think more locally, last summer, we had a big community in Garden Valley that had to evacuate and was pinned in on 3 sides by wildfire. And I saw multiple patients from that area that had to go back into that community this summer with this fear hanging over their head that this is going to happen again. Or somewhere like Sun Valley, where we went for my parents' 50th anniversary last summer, and our entire trip was when the AQI was in the thousands. So we were there for this big celebratory event and couldn't get it outside and experience anything. So, it takes a big toll on our mental and physical health to not be able to get out and enjoy the things that we normally like to do.
Yeah, and our overall quality of life, right? Yeah. What about, so people that are directly involved, but what about those who are observing, right? Say, for instance, kids, people, anyone watching the events unfold on TV or on social. That itself can create a bit of trauma, can't it?
Oh, certainly, yeah. That's definitely, I think, probably one of the newer things that are emerging that you don't necessarily have to be directly involved with it. So I think doing things like, I think it's important to be exposed to it, maybe limiting some of that exposure, not doing the doom scrolling all night long,
Yeah.
right? You know, trying to limit how much of it you're watching. Those are super important things, in my opinion. to
Yeah,
help with
but I
that.
mean, just a knowledge though too that there's a potential for wildfires again this season. I imagine that that's going to drive anxiety through the roof for some individuals, right? Because as we approach that time of year, I mean, it's inevitable. Something's going to catch fire. So how do we navigate that mentally, but then also protect everyone physically? This is a very deep, big conversation, gentlemen. I see why you've been investing so much of your career into it. On that note, give us some strategies. Help our children build some resilience in the face of this.
So, I mean, I think, like Wes said, you don't want to be doom scrolling, but you also don't want to withdraw and be completely ignorant of the world around you. So it's important to get short exposure to reliable news sources, educate yourself about the topic, and then be able to pull away from that and not spend all your time. I mean, it's a strategy that I use because this, as you've seen, is a pretty serious, pretty scary topic to study or talk about. But ignoring it is not the right answer either. And I think the first step is to educate. The second step is to talk about it so that our kids have a release valve at home with their parents, with their friends, with their siblings, that they can talk about this in a safe space and acknowledge that those feelings are real, that the fear they're experiencing is real. And then, maybe come up with a strategy. Say, hey, every August it seems like the smoke is getting worse. Let's plan our family backpacking trip so that it's in June this year, so maybe we missed the wildfire season. Pay attention to the weather forecast, pay attention to the AQI, so you can know that you're minimizing you and your family's risk of exposure to extreme heat or to the degraded air quality that comes with wildfire smoke. Because it's not just the stress of thinking about it, it's actually the exposure to those things that worsens things. So talk about it, learn about it, and plan for it. I think those are the best strategies you can have.
Yeah, and I was just going to say really quick, I think that points to what we hear psychologically a lot: control the factors you can control, right? It's like you're saying, paying attention to the weather, making sure you know when you're going to take advantage of those activities so you can get your mental health care in, which is the exposure to the outdoors and doing the things that you love when you know that it's going to work. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we've kind of mentioned it, but I think the other important thing is just, if this is something that you care about, which in my opinion we all should, getting involved is a thing that has really helped me a lot. For when these times are really bad, I have a sense of, it helps me to cope with it a little bit, to know that like I'm trying to do something to help the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the saying you said? Action is what?
The antidote to despair.
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
And I mean, I think one thing we learn in therapy and teaching kids how to cope with things is that, there's a sphere of control that you have, and then a circle of influence around that. And when things are outside of your circle of control or your sphere of influence, you just have to learn to let them go. And no one person has the ability to turn off fossil fuel emissions that are driving carbon dioxide levels being higher, which are driving temperatures, which are driving these climatic changes. But we can all do something in our circle of control or our sphere of influence that allows us to do things. So, it's not that I expect any one person to go out and solve this problem, but if you can go out and build a garden in your community that increases the air quality in that region, or plant some pollinator seeds that bring bees back to your area. These are little steps, but they're meaningful. And I think everybody has an ability to make an impact. And like Wes said, getting involved is what makes me feel better more than anything else.
Absolutely. I want to know where your personal passion for this topic came from. How did you get into this space?
So for me personally, this is something that I've only really been into for like the last probably 4 to 5 years. And it initially started out with, I'm from Idaho, and I grew up in our outdoor space here, which is, we've all said it is like the reason that most of us are here. And so a lot of it started for me with the desire to try to protect those spaces, to make sure they're there for future generations and that we can use them as long as possible. And then I have a 20-month-old daughter as well too. And when you start thinking about what kind of world you're going to leave your kids, is the thing that really motivated me to start doing this.
Yeah, changes your whole perspective, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I was I'm an ER physician, and I was working in ERs during COVID, and in the summer post-COVID, we had a really hot summer. 2021 was the hottest summer on record at that time. We had a really early and really intense wildfire season, so the air quality was really poor. And I was riding in the Boise Trails Challenge, and mountain biking, and I couldn't find a safe time for me to go out and ride. I mean, I didn't know anything about what wildfire smoke was doing to me at that time because I hadn't really learned about it yet, but I knew I felt terrible, and I knew it was too hot to bike to feel comfortable, and that really triggered me to start thinking more about this as a health issue. And like Wes, I've got 2 daughters that are now 15 and 17, and I've got 2 parents that I moved out to Idaho, and you know, I started thinking about what am I exposing them to by having my kids out at summer camps all day in the heat and smoke. You know, having my parents walk around because you know, older populations are more vulnerable, just like younger populations are. So that really kind of lit the fire for me, worrying about those health impacts that we're going to see for my cherished populations.
And you both are not alone in this space, you know, wondering, what does this look like? How is this physically impacting my kids, myself? I am so glad that you are both leaning into this space and trying to find some solutions and bring awareness on, you know, the climate change isn't, you know, yes, there's a political factor, yes, there's an environmental factor, but the environmental factor is far beyond just saving species and our oceans. It comes down to our fundamental well-being, right? Where can people go so they can learn more about this topic?
There's you know, a couple like just general websites that you can go to, like just searching like the basic science of climate change. We'll have a website up that'll have like information from our health symposium where lectures are going to be available to watch as well too.
Great.
And then Ethan, I believe you have a
St. Luke's has a sustainability website that will link to all the lectures from the symposium. And the Idaho Clinicians for Climate and Health is an organization I started in 2021 during that summer. And we have a great website that's packed with information that people can learn about the health impacts of climate change, and also catch these lectures. We've had a climate and health learning series that's been going on for about 3.5 years through St. Luke's and Idaho Clinicians for Climate and Health, and all of our lectures are posted on YouTube. It's a great sort of way to get your climate and health knowledge up.
Wonderful. Both of you, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your knowledge, and please keep us posted because I know there's a lot more to learn.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep.